The rain started before sunset, but by midnight the storm had become something the people of Black Hollow would talk about for years. Lightning ripped across the sky like giant cracks splitting the heavens apart, thunder shook the windows of every ranch house in the valley, and the dirt roads had already turned into rivers of mud. Most people locked their doors and prayed the storm would pass before morning. But somewhere beyond the hills, a horse was screaming. Not the normal frightened whinny of a startled animal. This was deeper. Desperate. Angry. The kind of sound that made even experienced ranchers freeze in place. And one man heard it. Ethan Cole stood alone on the porch of his weather-beaten cabin, rain pouring from the brim of his hat. He was 43 years old, broad-shouldered, quiet, and known around town as the cowboy who never smiled anymore. Years earlier, Ethan had been one of the best horse trainers in the county, until a tragic accident during a flood took the life of his younger brother Caleb. After that night, Ethan stopped rescuing animals during storms. Stopped competing. Stopped trusting himself. But tonight, that scream dragged every painful memory back to the surface. Another bolt of lightning flashed across the valley, and Ethan saw it for half a second. A black horse. Standing near the cliffs beyond Miller's Creek. Completely alone. The horse reared violently as thunder exploded overhead, its mane whipping through the rain like black rope. Something about the animal looked wrong. Terrified. Trapped. Ethan's stomach tightened. "You stay here," he muttered to his old chestnut horse, Rusty, while saddling him anyway. Because deep down, he already knew he was going. Now listen carefully, because this is where most people make the first deadly mistake when rescuing a horse during a storm. They panic and rush straight toward the animal. And panic can get both of you killed. Ethan knew that better than anyone. The trail toward Miller's Creek had almost vanished beneath rushing water. Rain hammered his coat as Rusty pushed forward through the mud. Every few minutes lightning illuminated the valley in terrifying detail. Broken tree branches, flooding ravines, barbed wire fences barely visible beneath the water. Then Ethan heard the screaming again. Closer this time. Rusty suddenly stopped moving. The old horse's ears pinned back. He smelled danger. Ethan slowly looked ahead and finally saw the black stallion clearly for the first time. The animal stood trapped between two fallen trees near the edge of a washed-out embankment. Water rushed violently beneath him. One wrong step and the horse would fall straight into the flooded creek below. But that wasn't the worst part. Wrapped tightly around the stallion's back leg was twisted barbed wire. Every time the horse panicked and pulled away, the wire cut deeper. Blood mixed with rainwater beneath him. "Easy," Ethan whispered under his breath. The stallion snapped his head toward him instantly, nostrils flaring. Wild. Terrified. Ready to fight. And right then, another mistake nearly happened. A pair of headlights appeared behind Ethan through the rain. Ethan. It was Deputy Lena Brooks, pulling her truck dangerously close to the flooded trail. She jumped out wearing a yellow rain jacket, shouting over the storm. "You can't go near that horse. The bank's collapsing." But Ethan barely looked back. Because the stallion had shifted again. Mud crumbled beneath his hooves. Another inch and he was gone. Now here's what nobody tells you about frightened horses during storms. They don't think like humans. They don't understand you're trying to help. All they know is fear, noise, pain, survival. And a scared horse weighing over 1,000 pounds becomes pure chaos. Ethan dismounted Rusty carefully. The black stallion instantly lashed out, kicking violently against the trees trapping him. The sound of snapping wood echoed through the rain. "Back off," Lena shouted. "He'll kill you." Maybe she was right. But Ethan noticed something strange. The stallion wasn't attacking randomly. He kept glancing toward the flooding creek. Like he remembered something. Like he'd already survived something horrible before tonight. Ethan stepped slowly through the mud, keeping his body low and calm. "No sudden movements," he whispered. Another deadly mistake people make during horse rescues is staring directly into the animal's eyes. Predators do that. It feels threatening. So Ethan focused on the horse's shoulder instead. Slow. Careful. Respectful. The stallion trembled violently, rain streaming from his tangled mane. Lightning flashed again. And for one horrifying second Ethan saw deep scars across the horse's neck. Old scars. This horse had been abused. Suddenly the stallion lunged forward in panic. The trapped wire tightened. The horse screamed. And the tree beside him cracked loudly. Lena gasped. The whole bank's giving way. Ethan's pulse exploded. If the horse went over the edge now, the wire would drag him under instantly. But Ethan still couldn't rush. That was the difference between rescuers and fools. He slowly removed the rope from his saddle. Rain soaked his hands as he spoke softly. That's it, easy now. The stallion's breathing slowed for half a second. Then thunder erupted directly overhead. Boom! The horse completely lost control. He reared backward violently, snapping one of the fallen branches holding him in place. Mud collapsed beneath his rear legs. Half his body slid toward the raging creek. Lena screamed. Rusty whinnied wildly behind them. And Ethan made the split-second decision that changed everything. He jumped. He was no longer trying to save the horse. He was trying to save himself. But the storm wasn't finished with them yet. Because far upstream, something massive had just broken loose in the floodwaters. And it was heading directly toward the creek. If you're already feeling the tension building, hit like and subscribe right now. Because what happened next turned this rescue into something nobody in Black Hollow could ever forget. The roar reached them before they saw it. At first Ethan thought it was thunder echoing through the canyon again, but the sound kept growing louder, deeper, heavier, violent enough to vibrate through the soaked ground beneath his knees. Rainwater streamed down his face as he looked upstream into the darkness. Then lightning exploded across the sky. And everybody froze. A wall of floodwater was racing toward them. Entire tree trunks spun inside the current like broken matchsticks. Pieces of fencing, debris, and shattered branches crashed together in the raging creek below. The storm had destroyed part of the mountain dam farther north, and now all that water was surging straight toward Miller's Creek. Lena's face went pale. "Ethan," she screamed. "You have to move now." But Ethan couldn't move. Not yet. Because the black stallion was still trapped. The horse thrashed violently beside him, eyes wide with terror as the sound of the flood grew closer. Mud kept collapsing beneath the animal's rear legs. Every movement dragged him inches closer to the edge. One wrong pull. One burst of panic. And both of them would disappear into the water. This is another mistake inexperienced rescuers make. They try to overpower the horse instead of calming it. But fear cannot be beaten out of an animal. Fear has to be understood. Ethan forced himself to breathe slowly despite the chaos around him. He lowered his voice. "That's it, easy." The stallion's chest heaved violently. Rain dripped from Ethan's fingertips as he carefully reached for the twisted barbed wire cutting into the horse's leg. Blood mixed with muddy water around the wound. The wire was wrapped deep. Too deep. He needed cutters. And he didn't have any. Another flash of lightning lit up the valley, and Ethan suddenly noticed something hanging from the horse's neck beneath the soaked manere. A broken leather strap. Part of an old halter. This wasn't a fully wild horse. At some point, someone had owned him. But who would abandon an injured stallion during a storm like this? The floodwater roared even louder now. Lena slid down the muddy slope toward Ethan, nearly falling. "We're out of time," she shouted over the storm. "The bank's going to collapse." Ethan looked at her sharply. "Get the cutters from your truck." Her eyes widened. "You seriously think there's still time?" "Go." Lena hesitated only a second before sprinting back through the rain. The black stallion jerked suddenly as thunder cracked overhead again. Ethan instinctively raised both hands. "No. Easy." The horse swung his head toward Ethan so fast their faces nearly collided. For a moment, everything stopped. Rain. Thunder. Fear. The stallion stared directly at him, trembling violently. Ethan could see scars across the horse's muzzle now, small white lines hidden beneath wet black fur. Old whip marks. This horse hadn't learned fear from nature. Humans taught him that. And suddenly Ethan understood why the animal kept fighting every attempt to help. Because every human hand he'd ever known had brought pain. The realization hit Ethan harder than the freezing rain. "You've been hurt before," he whispered quietly. The horse's ears twitched. And unbelievably, the stallion stopped pulling. Just for a second. That tiny moment of trust gave Ethan enough room to inspect the wire properly. Bad news. The metal had twisted around the tendon. If he yanked it free carelessly, the horse might never walk again. Then something else caught Ethan's attention. A brand mark. Faded but visible beneath the mud. His heartbeat stopped cold. No. It couldn't be. Ethan brushed rainwater from the horse's side and stared harder. The symbol was old, partially scarred over, but unmistakable. A crescent moon. Caleb's ranch brand. Ethan staggered backward slightly. Years ago, before the flood that killed Caleb, his younger brother had rescued dozens of abused horses from illegal fighting circuits and cruel owners. One of them had been a black colt barely old enough to stand. Angry. Violent. Untouchable. Caleb named him Midnight. But after Caleb died, Midnight disappeared during the flood. Everyone assumed the horse drowned. Ethan's chest tightened painfully as memories crashed into him. Caleb laughing while the young colt chased him through the fields. Caleb saying, "This one's special, Ethan. He just needs someone patient enough to earn his trust." Ethan had laughed at him back then. Now, staring into the terrified eyes of the full-grown stallion, guilt ripped through him like lightning. "Midnight," he whispered. The horse blinked. Then, incredibly, the stallion lowered his head slightly. Like he remembered the name. Ethan felt tears mixing with rain on his face, though he barely noticed. For years he believed everything connected to Caleb had been buried by the flood. But somehow, this horse survived. And now he was about to die right in front of him. The floodwater was almost there. The sound had become deafening. Lena came sliding back down the hill holding bolt cutters and a flashlight. "Hurry!" Ethan grabbed the cutters instantly and positioned them against the wire. But the horse panicked again at the metallic sound. He reared violently. The ground cracked beneath them. Chunks of mud broke away into the raging creek below. "Easy!" Ethan shouted. Midnight screamed, striking wildly with his front legs. One hoof slammed into Ethan's shoulder, throwing him sideways into the mud. Pain exploded through his arm. Lena gasped. "Ethan!" But Ethan forced himself back up. Because he understood something most people don't. A frightened horse doesn't need punishment. It needs someone who refuses to abandon it. Even when it hurts. Especially when it hurts. Ethan slowly approached again despite the pain shooting through his shoulder. Midnight trembled violently, nostrils flaring. "I know," Ethan whispered. "I know you're scared." Another mistake people make during rescues is getting angry when the animal resists. But trust isn't built during easy moments. Trust is built when fear says run, and someone stays anyway. Rusty reared in terror. And Ethan looked up just in time to see an entire dead tree crashing straight toward him and Midnight through the storm. Everything happened at once. The horse lunged. The tree fell. The floodwaters arrived. And Ethan made one impossible choice that nobody saw coming. The dead tree slammed into the hillside with a sound like an explosion. Mud and rocks crashed around Ethan as the entire bank gave way beneath him. For one terrifying second, the world disappeared into chaos. Rain, flying debris, screaming wind, and the roar of floodwater swallowing everything in its path. Then the ground vanished completely. Ethan dropped hard into the freezing creek below. The current hit him like a freight train. Water rushed into his mouth and nose as he tumbled violently beneath the surface. Branches slammed against his ribs. Mud blinded him instantly. He fought to breathe, fought to think, fought to survive. Above the storm, he barely heard Lena screaming his name. But then another sound cut through the darkness. A horse. Midnight. Ethan burst to the surface, gasping for air just long enough to see the black stallion struggling against the collapsing hillside above. One rear leg was finally free from the wire, but the horse had lost footing entirely. And he was falling straight into the flood. "No!" Ethan shouted. The current dragged him downstream instantly. He clawed desperately toward a half-submerged tree trunk and barely managed to grab it with one arm. Pain shot through his injured shoulder. Then Midnight hit the water. The enormous stallion crashed into the creek only yards away, thrashing wildly as the current spun him sideways. Terror exploded in the horse's eyes. His injured leg buckled beneath the force of the water. Most people think horses naturally swim perfectly during floods. That's another deadly mistake. Panicked horses can drown faster than humans when exhaustion and fear take over. And Midnight was seconds away from disappearing beneath the debris-filled current forever. Ethan looked toward shore. Too far. Lena was running along the collapsing bank, screaming helplessly through the rain. Rusty paced wildly behind her, unable to reach the creek safely. Ethan had one choice. He let go of the tree. The current instantly ripped him downstream toward Midnight. Freezing water hammered his body as he fought against the flood. Every instinct screamed at him to save himself. But then he saw Midnight's head disappear beneath the surface. And Ethan pushed harder. He reached the stallion just as the horse resurfaced in panic, striking violently with his front legs. One blow from those hooves would crush Ethan instantly. Still, Ethan grabbed the broken halter strap around Midnight's neck. The stallion exploded in fear. Water sprayed everywhere as the horse fought wildly against him. Easy. Ethan coughed. I'm trying to help you. But fear doesn't understand words. The current slammed both of them into floating debris. Ethan lost his grip for half a second, then grabbed the strap again desperately. That's when he saw something horrifying ahead. The creek narrowed sharply between canyon rocks about 50 yards downstream. The current there became deadly. Anything caught inside would be crushed instantly. Lena saw it too. Ethan! She screamed from shore. The canyon! But the storm swallowed most of her voice. Midnight fought harder now, completely exhausted and terrified. Ethan realized the horse wasn't trying to attack him anymore. He was drowning. And drowning creatures panic. Human or animal. It doesn't matter. Ethan forced himself closer despite the violent current. Rain hammered his face as he wrapped one arm around the horse's neck. That's it, he gasped. Stay with me. For a second Midnight resisted. Then something changed. The stallion stopped fighting him. Not completely, but enough. Enough for Ethan to guide the horse sideways toward a patch of shallow water near the bank. It almost worked. Then a massive tree trunk smashed into Midnight's injured leg. The horse screamed in agony. Ethan lost his grip instantly. The current separated them. No. Midnight spun away downstream directly toward the canyon choke point. And suddenly Ethan saw the same thing he'd seen years ago during the flood that killed Caleb. Someone slipping away while he stood powerless to stop it. The memory hit like lightning. Caleb trapped in the rushing water. Ethan unable to reach him in time. The guilt. The nightmares. The voice in Ethan's head whispering for years that he failed his brother because he froze. But tonight, something inside him broke free. Because this time, Ethan refused to lose another soul to the storm. He pushed forward with everything left in his body. The freezing current tore at him violently as he swam toward Midnight again. His lungs burned. His injured shoulder screamed with pain. Debris smashed against his back. None of it mattered. Ahead, Midnight crashed sideways into the canyon rocks. The stallion cried out desperately, trying to stand against the current but failing. Water surged around his chest now. One more wave would pull him under permanently. Ethan reached him just in time. He grabbed the horse's maner with both hands and planted his boots against the slippery rocks. Fight! Ethan roared. Come on! Midnight's eyes rolled wildly. The horse was exhausted. Done fighting. And then Ethan noticed something that chilled him completely. A thick rope tangled beneath the water around Midnight's injured leg. Attached to a rusted metal stake jammed between the rocks. Someone had tied this horse here. Deliberately. Ethan's blood ran cold. This wasn't an accident. Someone had abandoned Midnight during the storm to die. Lightning flashed overhead, illuminating fresh rope burns around the stallion's neck and scars along his body. Suddenly everything made sense. The fear. The violence. The distrust. Whoever owned Midnight before had treated him like garbage. And when the storm came, they left him behind. Oh, time for anger now. The floodwaters kept rising. Midnight stumbled again, nearly collapsing beneath the current. Ethan quickly reached underwater for the tangled rope, fingers numb from cold. He pulled a folding knife from his belt. The rope was pulled tight. One cut. Just long enough. Ethan grabbed the rope wrapped around Midnight's leg and shouted to Lena, "Throw me Rusty's lead rope." The wind nearly stole it, but Ethan caught it one-handed. The canyon thundered around them. Floodwater surged higher, and Ethan began tying the rope around his own waist first. Lena's eyes widened in horror. "What are you doing?" Ethan looked directly at Midnight, then back at the raging flood. And finally he said the words that changed everything. "If he goes under again, I'm going with him." Lena stared at Ethan like he had lost his mind. Rain poured down the canyon walls as floodwater exploded around the trapped horse below. Midnight struggled to stay upright against the current, his injured leg shaking violently beneath him. Rusty stood above the rocks, ears pinned back but steady, as if somehow understanding the life-or-death moment unfolding in front of him. And Ethan had just tied himself to the rescue rope. "If he pulls you under, you'll both die," Lena shouted. Ethan tightened the knot anyway. "Maybe," he answered quietly. Then he stepped deeper into the flood. The freezing water surged up to his chest instantly. Every muscle in his body screamed from exhaustion, but he forced himself toward Midnight one careful step at a time. The black stallion watched him closely now, not with wild rage anymore, but confusion. Distrust mixed with desperation. Because for the first time in this horse's life, someone was walking toward danger instead of away from it. Lightning ripped across the sky. Thunder shook the canyon. And then Midnight suddenly slipped again. The horse crashed sideways into the rocks with a painful cry, water surging over his neck. Ethan lunged forward instantly and grabbed the stallion's maner with both hands. "Pull," he shouted. Lena wrapped the rope around a tree and pulled with everything she had. Rusty braced instinctively beside her, almost helping anchor the line as the flood tried ripping Ethan and Midnight downstream. For one terrifying second, it almost worked against them. The current slammed Ethan beneath the water. Everything went black. Cold swallowed him instantly as the flood dragged him sideways across the rocks. His lungs burned. His injured shoulder exploded with pain. Then he felt it. Midnight wasn't pulling away anymore. The horse was trying to stay beside him. Ethan burst back above the surface, coughing violently. He grabbed the canyon wall and looked at the stallion. Midnight's terrified breathing matched his own. Two living creatures trapped inside the same nightmare. And somehow, they were fighting together now. That's when Ethan noticed something upstream. A flashlight. Someone else was out there in the storm. A figure appeared briefly through the rain near the cliffs above the creek, then disappeared behind the trees again. Lena saw it too. "Who is that?" Ethan narrowed his eyes. Then anger flashed across his face. Because he recognized the truck parked above the ridge. Dark green. Broken left headlight. It belonged to Wade Granger. The same rancher rumored for years to abuse horses he couldn't control. Suddenly everything clicked into place. The scars. The rope. The abandoned stallion. Wade had left Midnight here to die. And now he'd come back, not to save the horse, but to make sure nobody discovered what he'd done. Another flash of lightning illuminated the ridge. Wade turned to leave. "Hey!" Ethan roared. But the storm swallowed his voice. Wade disappeared into the darkness. Lena looked furious. That coward left him here. Ethan's jaw tightened. "We deal with him later." Because right now, Midnight's back legs were beginning to buckle again. The stallion was running out of strength fast. The floodwaters kept rising higher around them, and debris smashed against the canyon walls hard enough to shake the rocks beneath their feet. Ethan knew they had minutes left at most. Then another deadly mistake nearly happened. Lena climbed farther down the rocks too quickly, trying to help more directly. Her boot slipped instantly. "Lena!" She crashed hard against the canyon wall and nearly fell into the current before grabbing a branch. The rope jerked violently from her hands. Ethan and Midnight were suddenly pulled sideways again. The current dragged them both deeper toward the narrowest part of the canyon. Sharp rocks waited just ahead. One collision there would shatter Midnight's injured leg completely. Ethan planted his boots desperately against the slippery stone. "Stay with me," he shouted at the horse. Midnight's ears flicked toward him weakly. The stallion was exhausted beyond anything Ethan had ever seen. And then something unbelievable happened. Rusty moved. Without command. Without fear. The old chestnut horse carefully climbed farther down the rocks alone, ignoring the storm completely. He reached the edge of the flood and stretched his neck toward Midnight. The black stallion stared at him. Rusty let out a low, calming whinny. And Midnight answered. Softly. Not a scream. Not panic. The sound barely rose above the rain, but Ethan felt chills run through him instantly. Because that was the first peaceful sound Midnight had made all night. Horses don't trust easily after abuse. But they understand safety when they finally feel it. And Rusty was showing him exactly that. Ethan swallowed hard. "Good boy," he whispered. Using the moment of calm, Ethan slowly reached beneath the water again toward the rope tangled around Midnight's leg. His numb fingers searched desperately through the freezing current. Then finally, he found the knot. Not tied by nature. Tied by human hands. Tight. Cruel. Deliberate. Rage surged through Ethan again. Someone had wanted this horse helpless. Wanted him trapped during the storm. But Ethan pulled harder. The knot loosened slightly. Midnight trembled violently but stayed still. Another pull. Almost there. Then thunder exploded directly overhead with such force the canyon itself seemed to shake. A massive crack echoed through the darkness. Lena looked up in horror. The ridge. Ethan turned just in time to see an enormous section of soaked cliff breaking loose above them. Boulders. Mud. Entire trees. The landslide was coming. Lena grabbed his arm desperately. "Don't do this." But Ethan looked downstream toward the disappearing black stallion. Toward the horse his brother once saved. Toward the terrified creature that finally started trusting again after years of pain. And Ethan made his decision. He climbed onto Rusty bareback in the pouring rain. "If Midnight goes over that waterfall," he said quietly, "he dies alone." Then Ethan and Rusty charged straight into the storm after him. The storm felt alive now. Rain slashed sideways across Ethan's face as Rusty thundered through the canyon trails, mud exploding beneath his hooves. Lightning illuminated the valley in violent flashes, each one revealing pieces of destruction left behind by the flood. Broken trees, shattered fences, overturned barrels spinning through rushing water. And somewhere ahead in the darkness, Midnight was being swept toward the waterfall. Ethan leaned low over Rusty's neck. "Come on, boy, faster." Rusty pushed harder despite exhaustion, his powerful chest heaving in the freezing rain. The old horse understood the urgency. Ethan could feel it in every stride. Behind them, Lena's voice faded into the storm. "Ethan." But there was no turning back now. The trail narrowed dangerously along the canyon edge. Below, floodwater roared like a monster in the darkness. Ethan scanned desperately through the rain for any sign of the black stallion. Then lightning struck again. And Ethan saw him. Midnight was trapped against a cluster of rocks only 50 yards from the waterfall's edge. The horse fought desperately to climb free, but the current kept slamming him backward. One more surge would send him over. Ethan's pulse exploded. "Hold on." Rusty slid down the muddy embankment so fast Ethan nearly flew over his neck. The chestnut horse stopped inches from the rushing water, trembling but steady. Ethan jumped off instantly. The roar of the waterfall ahead was deafening now. Mist filled the air. The drop waited just beyond the bend. Midnight screamed again as another wave crashed over him. And then Ethan saw something that nearly broke him. The stallion had stopped fighting. Exhaustion had taken over. After years of abuse, after surviving floods, storms, ropes, pain, and fear, Midnight was giving up. Ethan stepped into the freezing water one last time. Every part of his body hurt. His shoulder throbbed. Blood ran down his arm from cuts he hadn't even noticed. He could barely stay standing against the current. But slowly, carefully, he moved toward the horse. "No more running," Ethan whispered through the rain. Midnight lifted his head weakly. The stallion's dark eyes locked onto Ethan's. Not wild anymore. Not angry. Just tired. And scared. Ethan felt emotion tighten in his chest. Because for the first time, he realized Midnight wasn't just fighting the storm tonight. He'd been fighting his entire life. Fighting cruel owners. Fighting fear. Fighting abandonment. Fighting the belief that every human eventually hurts you. And suddenly Ethan understood something about himself too. After Caleb died, Ethan had done the same thing. He pushed everyone away. Buried himself in silence. Stopped caring because caring hurt too much. Man and horse. Different wounds. Same loneliness. The current surged violently again, nearly knocking Ethan sideways. The waterfall roared closer. There wasn't much time left. Ethan slowly reached his hand toward Midnight's face. The stallion flinched slightly. Then stopped. Rain dripped from Ethan's fingertips as his hand finally rested against the horse's neck. Warm. Alive. Trusting. And right there in the middle of the storm, something incredible happened. Midnight leaned into his hand. Just slightly. But enough. Enough to change everything. Ethan closed his eyes for half a second, overwhelmed with emotion. "You're not alone anymore," he whispered. Another wave crashed against them. This time Midnight tried to stand. Not from panic. From effort. Ethan instantly grabbed the broken halter strap. "That's it. Come on." The stallion stumbled forward weakly. One step. Then another. The current fought them every inch of the way, pulling toward the waterfall like a giant hand trying to drag them into darkness. But Rusty moved too. The old chestnut horse stepped directly into the edge of the flood beside them, refusing to leave. Midnight saw him. And somehow, that gave the black stallion strength. Together, the two horses pushed forward while Ethan guided them through the raging water. It was slow. Painful. Terrifying. But they moved. The edge of the waterfall roared only yards away now, white water exploding into the abyss below. One slip and all three were gone. Then disaster struck again. A floating tree trunk slammed into Ethan's side with brutal force. He cried out and lost his grip completely. The current seized him instantly. "Ethan!" Lena's scream echoed from somewhere above the canyon. Ethan crashed into the rushing water, spinning violently toward the waterfall edge. He clawed desperately at the current but couldn't stop himself. This was it. After all these years, after finally finding peace, this was how it ended. Then suddenly, something grabbed his jacket. Hard. Ethan slammed against shallow rocks near the bank, coughing violently. For a moment he couldn't understand what happened. Then he looked up. Midnight stood beside him. The black stallion had caught Ethan's coat between his teeth. The horse was pulling him out of the water. Ethan stared in shock. Midnight pulled again desperately, dragging him farther from the current until Ethan finally managed to grab solid ground. The realization hit everyone at once. The horse had saved him. Lena covered her mouth in disbelief from above the ridge. Rusty whinnied loudly into the storm. And Ethan? Ethan just stared at Midnight with tears mixing into the rain. After everything humans had done to this animal. After every reason Midnight had to hate people. He chose compassion anyway. The storm began weakening shortly after that. Almost like the valley itself had finally exhaled. By dawn, the rain slowed to a soft drizzle over Black Hollow. Rescue crews eventually arrived near the canyon and helped escort the exhausted horses back to Ethan's ranch. News of the rescue spread through town faster than wildfire. People who hadn't spoken to Ethan in years suddenly showed up offering supplies, blankets, and help rebuilding damaged fences. And Wade Granger, Deputy Lena Brooks, made sure he didn't disappear this time. Investigators discovered. Because sometimes rescuing a horse during a storm isn't actually about saving the animal. Sometimes the horse saves you instead. If this story touched your heart, make sure to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who still believes trust and compassion can heal even the deepest wounds. And remember, fear can break a soul, but patience can bring it back to life.